Hey guys, this is chess coach Andrew Rankin. Today I want to share with you a game featuring the Slav defense. I have been playing the Note Boom recently and have two videos on it, but inevitably the positions in the Note Boom can get quite hairy, I admit, especially against e4 instead of e3, or against the anti-Note Boom variation, which is bishop g5 after d takes c4. And that's why I want to also cater to those players who enjoy a nice solid position right out of the opening. So this is an example game I played recently online against a 2050 rated chess.com rapid opponent. So the game starts with d4, d5, c4, the queen's gambit, c6, the Slav defense, knight c3, and knight f6. Knight f6 is really your mainline Slav. And now my opponent plays the interesting move g3. He wants to transpose into a Catalan by putting this light square bishop on this strong diagonal, and if I play d takes c4, then his bishop gets even stronger. It's also really hard for black to hold on to the c4 pawn, and that's why I'm really not interested in those kind of shenanigans. And so I just continued developing my light square bishop to f5. I do want to note that it is very important in Slav positions that you don't develop your light square bishop unless you are fully confident that you can do so without running into problems with queen to b3. And so here, queen to b3 is not a very good move because we can meet it with queen to b6. If he ever takes, then our rook becomes very active on the open a file. And if he decides to take in the center, we can take, and if he keeps on taking, we actually sacrifice the knight temporarily. Or sorry, not the knight, but the pawn temporarily. We get a tempo on the queen, and then we can give bishop to b4 check. King slides over, queen takes the center pawn, and this position is really bad for white. So that's why queen to b3 is really not a very strong move. We're not too worried about that, and that's why my opponent played the move bishop to g2. So we get a nice closed Catalan position after the move e6. I'm not really worried about this bishop. In fact, in a lot of cases, I'll argue that it's misplaced because it's exerting absolutely no pressure on my position. All it does is facilitate the move e4, which you'll see later in the game. But e4, all it does is really trade pieces, and I'm not really too worried about that because I get an open d file. You'll see that I get really nice pressure on the d file for the middle and end game. And trading a couple of pieces, such as a pair of knights, and then this knight can come back to f6, is really only good for black because I have a slight space disadvantage. So trading one knight is excellent. My opponent continued with knight to f3. And now top engine move is actually to play the move h6. And the reason why we want to play h6 is because we don't ever want to allow knight to h4, winning the bishop. The bishop can always go here, but he can take it. And yeah, we're going to end up with a damaged pawn structure. And if we go back to g6, for example, let's say we play knight b to d7. He plays knight to h4, bishop g6, knight takes, pawn takes. That's not very good. So if you do forget about the move h6, I actually recommend after he goes here to just ignore it. And you end up with this interesting kind of stonewall setup in the center. So that's why we have the move h6 inserted. So that's a nice little pocket for the bishop. He castles, and I play knight b to d7, just developing my knight. Not really sure where I want to put my bishop, but I have a good idea where I want to put my bishop. And he confirms this with rook to e7. So he's saying he wants to play the move e4. If I'm not careful, the move e5 will come, and if the bishop is on d6, he'll fork my two pieces. So that really confirms that I just want to develop my bishop to e7. Now I should note that the computer wants me to take on c4. You can do that, and you get this nice d5 square, but I'm not a big fan of taking away from the center, especially when the move e4 is about to come crashing down on my face. So for that reason, I like to keep my center nice and solid. That way I can always take and then have an open d file. So he plays knight to d2, preparing the move e4. I castle, here comes e4, pawn takes, knight takes. Computer wants me to trade knights and then play knight f6, that way black has no space problems. I played the move queen to c7. I didn't see that bishop to f4 comes with tempo, but I don't think I'm too worried. I can always drop my queen back to d8, or I can even go to b6 and tickle this pawn on b2. He doesn't do that, however. He plays b3, preparing to fianchetto both of his bishops. I play my f rook to d8, because I actually kind of want to play on the queen side. If this bishop is biting on granite, then maybe I can push the a pawn and get rooks on two semi-open files. He goes bishop to d2. I play bishop to b4, just tickling the knight and saying, hey, if you move the knight, you might lose the exchange. So maybe I'm threatening, knight takes, bishop takes, rook takes, and maybe I'll trade off the bishop someday and get a good knight versus bad bishop endgame. So that's kind of the long-term ideas of the move bishop b4, but really I'm just trying to create weaknesses. He plays knight takes knight, I play knight takes knight, and now I've solved my bad knight problem. He plays the move a3. I'm really happy about this move because you'll notice these pawns have moved quite a bit, and they end up very weak later in the game, and that's what ends up losing the game for white. So I go bishop to c5, taking advantage of the pin. I'm happy to trade a bishop and a rook for a queen because I'm pretty sure that my queen will be nice and active, and my pawn structure is so solid I don't think his the imbalance of material, his extra piece, for example, a queen is one piece, a rook and bishop is two, so he technically has one more piece than I do. I don't think that activity is going to count for much because of how solid my pawns are. So he goes knight to e2. He's preparing the move b4, which I think is actually making these pawns good. So I really want to stop that move, and that's why I play the move a5, and the computer supports this. The computer says that's the best move, and I really like this because I forever cement these pawns here, and now I can start to make weaknesses out of them, especially the move d4. If he can play b4 and then maybe d5 or b5 or c5, all of these moves seem very annoying because he actually has a pawn majority on the queen side, but now that they're all stopped in their tracks, I can start to target them. He plays queen to c1, so now my bishop is really under attack, and I drop the bishop back to e7. That way, this bishop is never threatening to damage my pawn structure. He plays knight to c3, activating a piece, and I prepare to double up my rooks. I like this because I'm defending the b7 pawn in case there's any trades. For example, after the move c5, maybe pawn takes, queen takes. He doesn't have the move bishop takes b7, and I'm also preparing to double up my rooks. He goes knight to e4. I play bishop takes, offering a trade of both minor pieces. Bishop takes, knight takes, rook takes. And now we want to improve this bishop on e7, and we put it on f6. So now the bishops are basically canceling each other off, and I'm happy with this because I think that his pawn movement is going to prove to be more of a weakness than a strength. Plays bishop to c3, targeting my a5 pawn, but it is defended by the queen, so I feel free to double up my rooks. Rook a to d8. He plays queen to e3, guarding his center pawn because I was threatening to win it. But now I have the move queen to b6, and I'm targeting both weak pawns, and no matter what, he's losing material. So black is already -1 here because we're about to win a pawn. Plays rook to d1, probably makes sense, protecting the more important pawn, which is the central pawn. And I play queen takes b3. Notice that he could play bishop takes a5, but then I'm just going to play the move queen takes queen, and after rook takes or pawn takes, I can simply move my rook over to the a file and potentially pick up this a3 pawn. So I'm not really worried about bishop takes a5. So he moves the queen back. Now he's really preparing the move bishop takes a5, and I want to stop that move, so I just play b6, nice and solid. He plays rook to g4, and his idea is that he's going to play queen takes h6, and after I play queen takes bishop, he has queen takes f6, and I really have problems defending my g7 pawn. He's threatening mate, and he's getting all kinds of activity. So I just slide out of that with king to f8. And now my opponent comes up with a really clever idea, but he misjudges whether or not he needs to prepare the move. So he plays bishop to f4, and his idea is to take the bishop, and after pawn takes, queen takes, maybe he has to defend the bishop first, like bishop back to a1. But the idea is to create some really serious imbalances and to create lots of weaknesses on my king side. So I really like this. The problem is that it runs into bishop to g5. And so that's why I said he really needed to prepare this move. Plays rook e1, and of course we take the exchange, damage the pawn structure. He can't take with the queen because then he loses another piece. And I play queen takes c4. So now we're up 4 points of material, and it's a matter of just keeping everything solid and making sure he has no counterplay. After he plays queen to e3, I want to stop this bishop from getting active. If I can keep his pawn from moving and his bishop from getting active, then black should be able to clean up quite quickly. So I play rook d5, really nice lateral defense and stopping this pawn, which prevents this bishop from getting active. He drops the bishop back. I attack it with queen c2, and after bishop to c3, he cannot prevent losing this bishop because we have the move c5. c5 is threatening to take and fork the two pieces, and if he takes the pawn, then we have rook to d3, and we're picking up the piece anyway. So he's really in trouble here. He plays the move rook to c1, but luckily we can get out a dodge with check, queen g6 check. When he moves the king, now we take the pawn and we fork the two pieces. So he gives up the bishop, rook takes, and now he's losing the game, most definitely. He's down a rook and 2 pawns, but he loses quite quickly after queen to b3. And now, of course, when you're winning, you're never afraid to trade. So we force the queen trade with queen d3 check, queen takes, rook takes, my opponent resigns. So I hope you guys found that useful. The Slav defense is excellent. I recommend it. It's probably my second favorite opening next to the Noteboom. And I hope you guys enjoyed that. Take care. Bye.